Hello everyone. Let's have a look into what are the different types of inflation based on reasons or causes. The first one is demand pull inflation. Second, cost push inflation. And third, we have built-in inflation. The cost push inflation is further subcategorized into three types: raw material push inflation, profit push inflation, and wage push inflation. Let's quickly decode each of these in detail. What is demand pull inflation in simple terms? When there is a rise in the price of a commodity due to excess demand for that particular commodity, it is called as demand pull inflation in simple terms. It is a situation when the total or the aggregate demand exceeds the aggregate or total supply in the economy. Too much of demand, automatically what happens? The producers will slowly and gradually shoot up or increase the price of the commodity, leading to a scenario of demand pull inflation. This demand pull inflation is to be considered from the point of view of the consumer, because the consumers have an increased demand for a commodity due to which inflation or price rise happens, right? So now let's have a look into what are the reasons or causes for demand pull inflation. First one is rapid growth of population. When too much of population keeps on increasing, automatically the demand for the commodities also keeps on increasing. Slowly and gradually, the price of the commodities also shoots up. The second one is role of black money. Too much of money in the economy leading to parallel economy. Automatically, the purchasing capacity or power of people also increases. The third reason is mounting or increased government expenditure. When the government keep on spending more money for various activities, it could be a socio-economic welfare activities, in order to meet the growing demand of people to cover up such situations, automatically what will they do? They'll start increasing the price of the commodities, leading to inflation. What inflation? Demand pull inflation. Now, finally, another reason is deficit financing. What is deficit financing? It is a policy that is used by the government to finance the budget deficits that the government is facing. In simple terms, when the public revenue, which means the revenue or income the government gets via taxation or non-tax resources, is less compared to the public expenditure or spending they have to do, automatically a deficit or gap happens. To finance that, what will the government do? There are two options. One is they'll resort to borrowing. When they borrow within the country, it is called as internal borrowing. When they borrow outside the country, it is called as external borrowing. When there is a limitation to that, they will resort to printing of new currencies. So actually, deficit financing is nothing but printing of new currencies to balance the situation. So again, why printing happens? Why borrowing happens? To meet the increased demand of the people or the consumers, leading to what? Inflation or price rise for the commodities in the future. Automatically, demand pull inflation takes place. Apart from this, an increase in aggregate demand and consumption leading to demand pull inflation is also because of increase in money supply and bank credit. Too much of circulation of money in the economy, leading to increased liquidity. Liquidity means money supply in economics. So, leading to increased liquidity, what happens? The purchasing capacity or power of people increases. They start demanding whatever they want. Automatically, the prices or inflations shoot up. These are the reasons. One more reason is there. If you see, reduction in taxes. If the government reduces taxes, direct as well as indirect taxes, for example GST, automatically people save a lot of money. And now they start demanding more of a commodity. The producers utilize the situation by increasing the price of the commodity, leading to demand pull inflation. This is what you should know with regard to demand pull inflation. Now, moving on to the next one. What is cost push inflation in simple terms? When there is an increase in the aggregate or total supply in the economy, and because of which the price rise is happening, automatically such a situation is called as cost push inflation. Here, the aggregate supply or total supply will exceed the aggregate or total demand. So now, when there is an increase in the price of factors of production, what are the factors of production in the economy? Land, labor, capital, entrepreneur. Right? So now, when there is an increase in the price of factors of production, for example, when there is a rise in the price of labors in the form of wages or salary, when there is a rise in the price of land in the form of increased rent or increased lease, automatically, what will the producers do? They will start pushing that burden in the final price of the product, leading to what? Cost push inflation, simple term. Let's say, for example, the laborers have demanded an increased wage. Automatically, the producers will give an increased wage from 500 rupees to 600 rupees per day. No problem. They will increase the wages, but what they will do to cover up that particular cost, if the final price of a product is rupees 10 means, they will make it 15 rupees. So, it is being pushed to the product. So, such a kind of price rise is called as cost push inflation in simple terms. Now, this cost push inflation happens due to what? One is hoarding or administered prices. Second is taxation. And third is fluctuations of oil price internationally. Now, this cost push inflation is also called as supply shock inflation. Why? Because this cost push inflation occurs when the general prices rise or inflation happens exclusively due to the rising or growing cost of factors of production. For example, when the price of raw materials increase. Let's say, for example, I am producing a cotton sari or a cotton kurta. Now, the price of cotton as a raw material increased from rupees 10 to rupees 20 per kg, for example. So, what I will do? If the final price of the sari, cotton sari that I produce is 500 rupees, because of increase in the price of raw material from rupees 10 to rupees 20, I will make the final price of my sari, cotton sari, to 550 rupees from rupees 500. So I am pushing what? The burden to the ultimate consumers. So now you can see a price rise happening, right? Because of the rise in the price of factors of production. This situation is called as cost push inflation in simple term. Now, this cost push inflation is a very, very serious concern. Why? Because this can affect the entire global economy as a whole. If you see in the year 1973, excuse me, if you see in the year 1973, as a result of oil shock, there was an unexpected rise in the price of oil by OPEC countries, oil and petroleum exporting countries. Automatically what happens? Oil is being imported and exported, right? So automatically what happens? There was a massive rise in the general price level of oil across the globe. So now, because the price of the raw material oil increased, it has been pushed in the final price of the oil, leading to inflation. What inflation? Cost push inflation in simple term. And thus, apart from this, cost push inflation is also caused by increase in indirect taxes, increase in import prices, and finally, higher cost of capital and interest rate. This is what you should know with regard to cost push inflation. And now, this cost push inflation is from the producer's point of view. That is why it is called as supply side inflation or supply shock inflation. If demand pull inflation is from the consumer point of view, it is called as demand side inflation. Similarly, cost push inflation is from the supplier or the producer point of view. So it is called as supply side inflation or supply shock inflation. Now, having said this, let's quickly have a look into the different categories of cost push inflation. The first one is what? Wage push inflation. when there is a rise in the price of what? In the price of commodities, automatically a situation of cost push inflation arises. Now, who buys these commodities? We, the consumer. Who are these consumers? Somebody who is working as a labor or a worker in some organization. It becomes too difficult for them to manage the situation. They'll start asking the owners or the producers to increase their wages. So when a laborer or a worker demands to increase their wages, what will the producer do? He or she will increase the wages from rupees 100 to, let's say, rupees 200. But what will they do? They will not take up this burden. Rather, they'll push this burden towards the final price of the commodity, thereby increasing the price of, let's say, the price of one particular pen is rupees 10. Because they've increased the wages of the laborers from rupees 100 to 200, they'll increase the final price of the product pen from rupees 10 to rupees 12. So they're pushing the burden to the consumers. So now this is a kind of cycle. It's a kind of a spiral, I can tell you, right? So wage push inflation is called as wage price spiral or inflation spiral in simple term. When wages are increased, the producers automatically push the burden to the final price of the commodity. So inflation or price rise happens. Again, the same consumers who are the laborers, they end up paying higher price for the commodity. So what is the point of having a wage increase? Nothing. When wage increases, inflation or price rise also happens, and again the wage increases. It's like a rotation or a circle or a spiral. Nobody is benefiting out of it, right? So this is called as wage push inflation in simple term. The next one is profit push inflation. Now sometimes what happens is that the firms or the producers, they'll decide to increase their profit margins. What will they do? They'll start having or charging higher prices for their product. So now when they start charging higher prices for their product, let's say for example, I'm producing this phone. Now because I want to literally charge a high price for this particular phone from, let's say, rupees 1 lakh to rupees 1,20,000. I will just push that particular price in the final price of a product, thereby resulting in what? Profit push inflation. They do this intentionally just because they want to increase their money or profit. And thus, profit push inflation generally happens when there are few of, or let's say some single producer producing commodity. When there is autonomy of for producing one particular commodity, such kind of profit push inflation takes place. And the final one is raw material push inflation. As I told you, when the price of raw materials increases or the factors of production increases, the producers will shift the burden to the final price of the commodity. This type of raw material push inflation is also called as supply shock inflation. And I can tell you that it's a very, very dangerous situation. Raw material is the basic resource or the factor input to produce any commodity. When the price of this increase, automatically the producer has no other go rather to double or increase the price of the final product, leading to a very serious repercussion. So these are the different types of inflation that you should know. And finally, you have one more type called as built-in inflation. This is similar to wage price spiral or inflation spiral or wage push inflation. Built-in inflation is a type of inflation that occurs due to the increase in the living standard of the salaried employees. When wage increases, automatically when these laborers go to the market to buy the commodity, there is inflation or price rise for that commodity. So what happens? No matter their wages increase from rupees 100 to 200, they end up paying a high price for the commodity or product they buy in the market. There is no point at all. So, built-in inflation increases the cost of living or living standard of the people, leading to because of price rise. This is called as built-in inflation in simple terms. So, I hope it is very clear for all of you the different types of inflation based on reasons or causes. So stay tuned for more updates. Till then, follow Instagram, Telegram and YouTube channel for more upcoming videos. Put down all your viewpoints in the comment box, whatever doubts, queries, whatever you have. Thank you and Jai Hind.